Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. In this video I'm going to show you how I paint a classic Forge World Empire unit, Manann's Blades.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description.
Tamarkan, the Throne of Chaos, an alternative, in many ways, supplement for Warhammer Fantasy. Back in 2011, we first saw Manann's Blades, and the miniatures are out the same year, I believe. Though, correct me if I'm wrong. A really beautiful book that's very, very expensive now. I think holders of the book definitely keep them very, very safe. And there were some special units in there to add to your Empire army, and one of them was the Manann's Blades. I won't cover the lore from the 2500s here, but this is a Warhammer the Old World video, and this brings us to the Arcane Journal for the Warriors of Chaos, where we saw Manann's Blades defending Arnau in the northern barony of Westerland in 2278, and judging by the small amount of lore in which they were mentioned, they were pretty much wiped out by Friedel's invasion. These are an old Forge World resin kit out of production now, in which you need the plastic Empire State Troop kit as well. You're using the sword arms and you're using the empty arms on the left in order to hold the resin shields. Beautiful sculpts, loads and loads of extra detail, very much old school Forge World though, and which does mean they're a little bit tricky to paint, as I found out while making this, but I've been lucky to have some sitting in a box for a little while, and I was really engaged to paint them for my Renegade Crowns army to become some veteran Sellswords. There's not many examples of them painted online. Looking at the old uniforms and heraldry book here, you can see the sort of Marienburg colours that I might use as inspiration. So I got them all built and primed black, and a pretty decent zenithal going over the top of them all, so they look very grayscale. I've even dry brushed them to really pick out the detail, so that some of the base layers I put down using contrast style paints as a bit of a heavy glaze will really show that sort of natural highlight through, and sort of speed things up and make it a little bit easier to do highlights over the top, and maybe in some areas like the hair not need to do any highlights at all. If you want to see how they got on at the Throne of Skulls event, then I have done a little video of that recently, and we did quite well. I'll pop a little link in for those of you who are interested. I had a week to go, so I needed to get on to go into full army painting mode, and I thought I'd go back to some slightly old school things and show some different things that I often do on the channel. Yes, I'm using some Army Painter Fanatic rose skin tone paints that I've used before, but I'm also going to use their flesh wash for the first time, and the first time in many years that I've used a flesh wash. So I decided to do a standard base coat and then wash on the flesh in old school kind of way, and then go back in and do a highlight up, and just to see how this works really as an army painting method. I don't usually wash. I usually just layer through about 3 or 4 different tones of skin, working from dark to light, and then these paint sets, they don't really have a very dark base color. I find you need to use something from one of their other ranges, and when I've been using Tooth and Coats, they would have as part of their triads a really dark color. So I thought I'd try this in reverse to see if it would speed things up. It takes about the same amount of time, but the effect was quite pleasing really. I'm not going to shout out all the names of the paints either. I'll put those up in a separate post on Patreon. It will be free to view. You don't have to be a paid Patreon member to see all the paints that I use in this video, but you will have to join at least as a free member to be able to see them. It's a lot easier than forgetting the odd thing. Now, I do hold up every single paint I use, I think, on camera, so you don't have to go and join the Patreon to see it. You can just pause the video, but rather than putting them in the show notes, which can be a little bit too much and mess with the algorithm, I'll go and put that on a separate post for those people that are really interested. But essentially, it's basic style painting, a nice base tone, giving it a wash, going back in with the next tone up, and then a highlight after that as well. Before I do the top highlights, you may have noticed I just paint in the eyes as well. That way, if I mess the eyes up, I can fix them before I've done that final highlight, because it's a lot harder and a lot more annoying to go back at that stage and touch them up. So far I've used 2 flesh tones and that wash, and I'm just going back now with the top highlight, which was, I felt, all I needed for a rank and file unit, and it worked very, very well. The finished result isn't really a whole lot different to what I normally do, but I thought it was be fun to go back and paint things a little bit more old school for this unit and see how much it really changes. And it just goes to show, really, I think as long as you've got a minimum of 3 colours, and that includes the shade, you're generally okay. You can get a nice effective unit. This technically has 4 with the shade, and that just gives you a little bit more depth as well, and I think the skin looks good enough as that. Now, saying all that, I do go on and add some of my favourite glaze effects afterwards. The first one here is Shyish Purple. You can use any purple contrast style paint, really, and I just painted in thin bands around areas like the cuffs, or where the shadow would be the top of a helmet, or around a collar line or something like that around the neck. Maybe blend it out a little bit, just a damp brush just to feather it out if it looks like it's a really harsh line, but it just adds that little bit of extra depth. And then finishing off with a pink. This is Vulpes Pink. Thin this because it's quite strong in pigment, almost 50-50 with water, and I like to apply it to the bottom third of a face and over the nose, and it just, again, gives that extra little bit of quality to the paint job. This is purely optional, went a little bit against my need to paint this unit quickly feel, but also this stage is actually quite quick, so it's worth doing if you've got the time. And because I really can't help myself, especially when I'm trying to save time, I did go back with an even brighter highlight of skin. So that takes it up to, I think, 5 colours in total, plus the 2 glazes. Yeah, okay, maybe it wasn't quite so basic after all. But what I did show during that process is that I could have stopped on 2 flesh tones and a wash, maybe the third, but these are sort of optional extras that really make them pop and stand out, especially those command figures on the front rank. So these are the 2 colours that I'm picked for the base of the uniform, and I wanted to focus on the blue and the yellow, probably leaning towards the yellow a little bit more than the blue, and only really adding red in there for accent colours. I think the Marienburg colours in the 2500s, in the old fantasy, there's a real heavy mix of red. If you look at the Studio Army for Westerland now, it's much more yellow there and blue, and very little red at all. I wanted to go somewhere a little bit in between. So there's a mixture here of sort of painting some tops yellow, some tops blue, and really mixing it around, but thinning these paints as much as I can and being quite deliberate with the way I paint them, so that it was easier to do less highlights later on in some areas. Some areas it's unavoidable, especially the larger the area. But the beauty of underpainting like this, some will call it slap shot, but you're underpainting your miniature, priming black, the white going on top, all the dry brushing, means there are certain areas, if you apply your contrast paint right, you'll get a really nice shadow in the recesses and quite a nice looking highlight, and you can leave it and walk away and save yourself some time. So I'm just working through all the miniatures, and there's too many different combinations to show you all, so it's just a little bit of an example. Some of them have got little pleats within the trousers themselves, so I'm just painting some of them internally, the blue or the yellow and vice versa. This has got a bit of a blue skirt, but I'm trying to be fairly even with my coats to try and remove any tide marks or pooling as much as possible, and working with that underpainted miniature to take it away off the flat surfaces, so you've almost got a highlighted look to start with, so that when I do go back to highlight later on, I'm reinforcing that rather than just fully highlighting over the top. As you can imagine, this was the longest part in the whole process. Every single one of the block needed a hefty amount of yellow and or blue on them, so it was a case of working my way around slowly and trying to take my time, because when you do underpaint like this, you don't want to spoil it by getting paint too much in areas that you don't want to. You're always going to make some mistakes. So the speeding up at the end does slow you down sometimes initially, especially when you've got fiddly miniatures like this that have got little bits of detail all over. You think, well, this would be quite simple, and then it's got little tufts or little pleats in the middle of something. So I'm trying to be careful and also trying to have a really nice smooth finish, which I was just describing. So it did take quite a while to do it this way. I think it's a little bit easier on some of the more modern plastic sculpts where the different areas of detail are a little bit more defined. So these were the yellows that I chose to work with as the highlights. They're on my wet palette and they're thinned a little bit with water. What I'm trying to do here is work with the colour that's already there, as I've already mentioned, rather than fight against it. I want that base contrast layer of yellow to be more than just a base yellow paint. Otherwise I'd have sprayed the miniature yellow or something like that. So I want to work with the highlights that's already there from using the contrast paint over the Zenithal. So in some areas I'll be using just the lighter yellow, some areas I'll be using the darker yellow or the mid-tone and then highlighting up. It really varies, that's why I've got them both on the wet palette at the same time. And I'm just trying to enhance the highlights that are already there and put as little paint on the miniature as I possibly can, rather than having to paint in every single highlight. So reinforce where I can, and if the highlight's not bold enough there, I'll add more of the lighter shade and try and match it in. Essentially what I'm trying to do with both the yellow and the blue is leave something a little bit more washed out and slightly pastel, compared to maybe the blues and yellows are a little bit more vibrant on the giant that I've painted for this army, or even some of the characters. I like the idea that they all have connections to Marienburg and to Westerland, but those connections are a bit disparate because it is a Renegade Crown's army. This is the remnants of the defeated Manann's blades from 2278 coming together. So they've got their uniforms, but they're a bit old and battered and faded. When you're painting like this, don't be frightened to go back with the contrast paint that you've used as the base layer and glaze it back in to reinforce those shadows and smooth out some of those transitions, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. And then you may be able to see that I'm working from underneath the arms and upwards more, or where the shadows are, and it just adds a little bit of richness, smooths it out a little bit more, and really sort of adds to the overall effect and stops it looking quite so washed out and nearly always glazed back after I've been painting. And the more I'm describing what I was doing here, the more it's not appearing like a super quick paint job. It was, compared to what I could have done, and this kind of stage doesn't take too long, but I do appreciate that I did start the video saying I only had a week to paint this, and I'm doing them relatively quickly. This is still relatively quickly, this is still army painting, just as sort of a higher end army painting that you have to do. You can definitely do it more basically. Exactly the same principles with the blues for highlights. I've got a very light blue there and white, so I can mix them together. They're both on the wet palette. You can just see the edge of it there. I've zoomed in so you can see the miniature better, but that's slightly out of shot. Plenty of water on there, thin them so that I can blend in the white to the blue where I want it to be and adjust as I go. And as you can see here, focusing on those top areas of the blue where it's already that little bit lighter because it's a contrast paint and it's gone into all those recesses. So rather than fighting with it, I'm just sort of tidying up and enhancing the lighter areas that are already there, making that a little bit brighter and moving down to a top highlight, which isn't quite almost white. I could have pushed it that far, but definitely quite light in places. And it's rinse and repeat for that glazing stage. So go back with that blue again, reinforcing the darker areas, and anywhere that's got a little bit too bright or a bit too chalky, just glazing it on. Really thin layers here, just painting them in certain areas. I don't want to cover all those highlights, but it just smooths it out, softens it, and adds a little bit more depth. And I think it really adds to it, really finishes it off, and it means you can tidy up any little mistakes you've made as well. With all the yellow and blue down, it's time to do the red, and this is the accent colour. So in most cases, this is going to be feathers, the odd little rosette on the tops of the helmets, and the shields. I thought they would be the perfect thing to stand out as red. It definitely matches all of the later kind of artwork and paint schemes that I've seen. You can obviously do whatever you want here, and I did toy with not having red on the shields at all and making them very different, but it's such a beautiful striking colour and really makes them stand out, so I couldn't resist it in the end. Dipping into some Army Painter Fanatic again. I've already got the red base down with the contrast paint. I'm just using this little selection of reds here. They're very vibrant, definitely the dragon red and the pure red are, and I've used them in a few projects recently. Really like the vibrancy of them, so they'll be perfect for highlights. So I've already got that base coat down with the contrast paint. Much like the skin tones, it's a very nice flexible triad. I don't think within the triad itself or the 6 colours that it goes as deep a red as I would like, so I'd often find something from elsewhere in their range or a different range to be the base for the reds. But once you get out of the sort of the base layer going down, there's a really nice spectrum through. They're all quite bright and vibrant, and the ones in the middle of this little expendable triad or flexible triad are quite vibrant. Nothing groundbreaking here though. I'm using the contrast base as the base, and I'm just focusing on building up through those 3 layers, leaving the shadows in the recesses, so each layer gets a little bit We're getting on to the nuts and bolts and the things that fill in the gaps. So we're talking about the webbing, the strapping, the leather belts, the little pouches, those kind of things. I'm using a Cygor brown here, which is one of my favourite go-to browns in the contrast range. It's really rich and vibrant, some red undertones which should work very, very nicely with the reds that are already there and contrast with the yellows. And while they're quite pastel, they're still relatively warm, at least the yellow is. So I'm just carefully, so I don't mess up my highlights, painting in all the straps. And I do the same for all the miniatures. I do the bottoms of their boots as well, not the turnovers at the top. But again, this is unit painting now, so I'm trying to use the same colour as much as possible across the whole batch of miniatures. This is boar hide and fur cloak from Tooth and Coats, and they are brilliant companions to that Cygor brown, and you can get nice conversions for Citadel paints if you're a Citadel paint user. They have a conversion chart for pretty much the whole range, and they compare very, very nicely. So go over to the Transatlantic Games website and you'll be able to find those. But again, essentially layering, highlighting here. It's quite old in its design, this miniature or these miniatures, so you haven't got really sort of sharp edges to some of the strapping. So rather than going with two lines, I've gone for a central highlight on most of the straps and belts, and just trying to leave as much possible in the shadows of that Cygor brown and making each highlight that little bit thinner. To keep things simple, I've picked 3 speed paint colours for the hair. I find speed paint a little bit more consistently thin than the contrast range, and because of that, it's great for fine detail like hair, fur, that kind of thing. Wood grain as well. It really runs into the recesses. He wants to be in the recesses and not on those top surfaces, which means that you can do really quite effective one coat jobs on things like hair. And there's very little hair showing on these miniatures. They're all wearing helmets and things, so there's an odd little bit of facial hair, beards, and I didn't want to spend ages doing lots of highlighting, so the 3 colours I picked work perfectly for that. There are a few areas of parchment or collars or cuffs from the shirts showing as well, so I just decided to go for Skeleton Horde as a really nice off-white. I didn't want anything to look too pristine, and it means again I can use one colour for lots of jobs. There's little bits of parchment paper as well as the socks that are showing on a few of them as well. They can all be the same colour. It all will work enough in terms of the context of the whole unit, rather than working from lots of different colours and again saving me a little bit of time, maybe where I lost it doing too many layers of highlights on the yellows and blues and the flesh. You really can use any of your favourite bone and white colours for this stage if you're sort of following along at home. I was probably adding a little bit more white to the highlights for areas of clothing, the socks and things like that, but when it comes to the parchment and even the turnbacks on the leather boots, the insides, I left it a little bit more of the sort of the off-white colour. Again, it's totally up to you how much you do, but I just wanted to work through this big batch of miniatures in pretty much in one go with these 2 colours on my wet palette and churn it all out by covering all the metallics with a darker bronzish kind of colour. It does vary from brand over time depending on what's available, but I really like the effect that it gives even for steel over the top of it. It gives that kind of deep and grimy tone to it and gives the overall colour of the metal a little bit more depth. And it's also a perfect colour to base for golds and things to go over afterwards as well. So I covered all of the metallic areas and all of the miniatures with this bronze colour. I recently picked up one of the new true metallic sets from Vallejo. I'm still trying to get my head around what they do or why they've designed them the way they have. I'm not going to use the wash because it's not often the way I paint with metallics. As you'll see, you get 2 identical paints in there. One's the airbrush version and one's standard. They are quite smooth though, which is what I'm looking for. And then there's a really bright highlight, which in my past experience hasn't worked well for other brands. They're usually too thin to use away from the airbrush. I was interested to see how it would work. So I'm using a bit of a mixture of the way I normally paint metal and trying these new ones. The actual metallics are quite smooth actually, so I'm quite happy with them. You don't always get that with a lot of ranges, so I'm going to be dipping in and trying some more. So I'm pretty happy with that. And again, the colours I've used will be in that article, and you saw me holding them up anyway. They go nicely over that base layer. And I quite like the effect. It's very similar to the kind of effect that I normally go for, so I'll definitely be playing around with these a little bit more. But anyway, this is not supposed to be a review of that paint. Essentially, though, I'm trying to make sure that I leave a little bit of that brown showing through around the edges and into the detail on all of the armour plates, just to give it that extra tone. And this metallic was really nice and quite bright and vibrant and shiny as it was anyway. So it's a really nice sort of mid to brighter tone of steel colour. So I do like it. Maybe would have been a little bit easier with a colour somewhere in between. But again, I thought I'd give it a go and try not to add too many layers after all the different layers of skin that I did. What I did find was that really bright colour that looks almost white works really well as a highlight. If you just brush it on gently along the edges like that, really picks out and it's not too thin. Of course, not everything on these miniatures needs to be steel. We've got that big bell on the musician, and I didn't want that to be steel. I wanted it to be sort of a bronzish colour, so obviously I'm using a slightly lighter bronze on top of the bronze that I've already started using, and then adding lighter tones and just sort of slowly blending up to a much brighter, almost desaturated gold looking colour, which I thought would be fine for the bell. You don't want it to look too bright and shiny. It's not going to be sort of the royal gold. It's definitely going to be that kind of fake gold effect that you sometimes get with slightly polished or well handled bronze. There were a few areas that needed to be gold as well, especially on the champion, that had a little bit more ornate work on his armour. So we've got that bronze base, the dark bronze base to work from. I'm just adding golds on top, and again it just shows the versatility of working from a bronze base. I've worked up to steel to a bronze colour, funnily enough, and also to a much brighter gold now, just by adding a mid-tone and a highlight on the golds as well. It works really nicely. I won't include a full basing tutorial in this video because it's very similar to what I do on a lot of my other videos. I'm actually doing a bit of a mix between two methods as well here, so they match up with a couple of different armies. But I use oil washes here on my metallics, and I also use them on my bases. So I did the bases first in order to make most use of the oil paint when it was out all in one go. Again, that army painting, that badge painting thing. I will still put an image with all of the stuff I used on my bases in that article, which I post up on Patreon, but I'm not going to talk you through all those different stages. But I am applying here mostly grease, some of it dark mud as well, ready mixed oil washes here, and I'm applying those in lieu of a standard wash. I like oil washes because they don't dry with sort of pooling and tide marks, and you can wipe them away. They take a good 24 hours for them to fully set. You don't have to varnish your miniatures before using them. If you keep them to the metallic areas, those areas are definitely quite robust, and you're not putting so much on that you're swimming in it. If you put loads and loads on, you could take your paint back off, depending on what paint you use and all the caveats around it. But the fun part with oil washes, you can use things like this, which is artist's thinner. You don't want to use your thinner you get in your DIY stores, and you can just take away anywhere that it's dried on the flat surfaces. It makes it really, really shiny, but leaves all the oils in the recesses, which makes it look really grimy, really dirty, but also more realistic. And that's why I like to use oils. Just need old brushes. Don't use your standard brushes for doing it, but they are very, very cool. So give them a go if you've ever been thinking about it. So skipping those final basing stages, the unit is done at that stage. Obviously there's lots of little extras that went on the bases with pigments and powders and things, but again they will be in those pictures. Nice black rims to tidy it all off, but I'm pretty happy with the way they came out. They're a little bit messy in places, some bits I'm not so happy with, but a lot of it is just the older Forge World sculpts. There's some little sort of delicate parts where I've had to repair, so they're not as smooth as modern day plastic miniatures, but they've got a lot of character. They're all magnetized to those trays, and if you played me over the weekend, you'll know that I struggle lifting them off without having to be so gentle because they're resin miniatures. So do be careful of those kind of things. So I'm sure that slowly over time, if I use them a lot, they will get broken. My next unit for Renegade Crowns is definitely going to be a unit that's in plastic. But I was so glad to finally be able to do something with them. I've loved the miniatures for a long time, and then Fantasy went away and I forgot I had them for a long time in a box. In fact, I had 10 and the command set, and then a friend a few years ago, as part of a sale, I ended up picking up 10 more. And I think one of the miniatures in there is a standard plastic Empire State Troops,man with the head and shield options you get on there, so you can't really tell the difference then. But they are really cool miniatures, showing their age a little bit, but I'm super happy to have them in my arm. But let me know what you think of the paint job, and do you have any old classic miniatures that you have itching to get paint on, to get back on the table for Warhammer the Old World? I know these aren't technically old classics, they are in terms of Forge World. Definitely when you put it in the wider Old Hammer and Middle Hammer sense, definitely not. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed painting them, even though they took a little bit longer than I expected. It was lovely to get them finished in time for the event that I took them to and actually get to use them on the table, even though they're pretty delicate, being Forge World resin and all. But loads of fun was had with them, and they did me very proud at the event as well. And if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me grow the channel more and be seen by other people. And if you like what you've seen here and you want to support me even further, please take a look at my Patreon. There's a link in the video description, multiple different tiers. Some of them include painting tuition as well, so go and check those out. Please also check out my channel sponsor, Counter Attack Bases. They make a wonderful range of gaming aids, including custom dice. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.